Good day, everyone, especially to our instructor, Professor Prince Desamimba. I am Elizabeth Bungabong Quijano, taking up Bachelor of Science in Forestry, major in Agroforestry. One of our requirements in the subject is to make a presentation. Also, instructed that we are the one to choose of our own crops for our presentation. So, I choose coffee crop as my presentation. Coffee crop production. We all know that coffee belongs to the classification of crops in the high value crops and plantation crops. Then we all know also that coffee is very common to us, right? Especially those person who love to drink coffee as their relaxation. In my topic, you will know how did this coffee being processed and how it cared by the grower or the farmers, and of course, the economic importance of it. Coffee, with the genus name of Coffea, is widespread throughout the tropics with more than 70 species. The crop produced and exported by more than 60 nations and ranked as one of the top cash crops in developing countries. In addition, coffee is generally cultivated species as well as products from these fruits and seed in different stages of processing and use intended for consumption. Coffee is a plantation crop well adapted to different ecophysiological conditions of the tropics. Here are the parts of the coffee. As you can see the figure, it is labeled, no? The center cut, the bean, which is the scientific term is endosperm, silver skin, the scientific term for that is epidermis or testa. The parchment, scientific term for that is endocarp or hull. Then the pectin layer, then pulp or mesocarp, then outer skin is the pericarp or exocarp. Based on 2013 Philippine Statistic Authority or PSA, Bureau of Agricultural Statistics or BS data, the top coffee producing provinces in the Philippines are Sultan Kudarat, followed by Sulu, Davao del Sur, Bukidnon, and Cavite. There are two types of Philippine coffee, which are Robusta and Arabica. These data provide one of the major considerations in reviving the coffee industry by strengthening market linkage, supporting the coffee growers, and encouraging more people to engage in coffee production. Enhanced industry competitiveness will be achieved through the support of standards. The economic importance of coffee crop. Coffee is a great economic importance to developing countries, including many LDCs or least developed countries, and of considerable social importance in consuming countries. Annual export earnings from coffee usually exceed to US dollar 10 billion or 10 billion US dollar, and coffee can account in some LDCs for over three quarters of total export earnings. It is estimated that some 100 million are largely dependent on coffee for their livelihoods. Then, based on my research, no, in our country, which is the Philippines, though we have coffee plantations, but our country imported coffee because due to the low coffee plantation here in our country, according to the Department of Agriculture. So this is the flowchart of how the coffee berries being processed. No, so as you can see, there are two types of process or method: dry and wet method. So in dry process, drying, then dehulling. I will explain it later. Then in wet process, pulping, fermentation, washing, and dehulling also. After the process, no, coffee berries is ready for roasting. Next is the coffee products. So here it is, the pictures, the figures that I've researched the coffee products. Then, primary production. The preparation or transformation of a raw material for further processing, either dry and wet methods. No, first is the location of production site. Primary production area and method of production. It is necessary to consider particular agricultural practices as provided for in package of technologies that will ensure the level of food safety of grain coffee beans supplied to processor for human consumption. Procedures associated with primary production should be carried out under hygienic conditions to minimize contamination and potential sources of contamination of grain coffee beans. The grower should implement measures that will minimize the presence of domestic and wild animals. So as a grower, you should put fences, no, planting buffer plants so that your production site is safety for any animals. No, they cannot easily pass through in your production site. In farm sanitation, next is the farm sanitation. Growers and agricultural workers should remove diseased or damaged plants to prevent the further spread of disease in the production site. Removal of the infested or infected plant parts, example the cherry, no, the fruit of the coffee tree, also known as cherry, from the tree and the soil is recommended. Consequently, burning of the infested or infected plants parts is designated proper is also encouraged. So those plant parts like twigs or any, it should be designated in a proper area. Then also, those infected plants or damaged should be disregarded so that it could be prevent for the spread of disease in the production site. Next is the waste management. Waste should not be allowed to accumulate in the coffee processing area. It should be further managed by keeping the storage area for waste water clean and dry. Then selection of planting materials. Quality planting materials or seedlings is recommended to be sourced from the BPI certified plant material seedlings coming from the accredited plant nursery operators, and materials or seedlings should be free from pests and diseases. So in the selection of planting materials, as a grower, you should be choosy in selecting seedlings. No, those you should choose those seedlings which is healthy. No, not in a those seedlings should be free from pests or diseases, and also it's coming accredited or coming from the plant nursery operators. Next is the land preparation. It is recommended that the area for planting coffee should have deep, fertile, friable, and well-drained soil but has sufficient water holding capacity. So in land preparation, as you should choose the area with a good type of soil. Also, area that has sufficient water, since coffee need to water, unlike to the rice that they really need uh, more water, but in coffee the soil must be moist, no, maintain the moisture of the soil for that for the coffee. Next is the soil conservation. So coffee plantations should implement erosion control measures which include contouring, silt pits, mulching, cover cropping, and planting crops against the slope. In planting coffee trees along the contour, the rows of coffee should run at right angle to the direction of the slope. So of course, for to conserve the soil, no, there are some erosion control measures, no, like contouring, salt pits, mulching, cover cropping, and no, the planting crops against the slope. So if you are your plantation site it be a slope, so at least aside that you were able to have an income sooner, but also help to conserve the soil in that area. Okay, fertilization. The use of fertilizers, particularly natural fertilizers or commercial organic fertilizers in coffee production, should be managed to limit its potential as source of the microbial and chemical contamination. If found to be contaminated with heavy metals or other chemicals at levels that may affect safety, these inputs should not be used. Also, all organic and inorganic fertilizers are to be used appropriately, optimizing yield and minimizing negative impacts on human health, the environment, and the quality of the coffee. Fertilizers must be clearly labeled and should be stored in a way that does not contaminate the environment. Also, growers or agricultural workers must not use untreated solid nor liquid manure because pathogenic microorganisms can persist in soils for long period of time. Then as a grower, you will also apply the organic fertilizer, right? Like the compost. Proper treatment procedures should be adapted for that to reduce the presence of pathogens in the raw material and to minimize the probability of contaminating the product. Also, it is encouraged to have a soil analysis. It is highly recommended as basis for the application of fertilizer. Then, growers should use only the registered agricultural chemicals. Next is the water management. If coffee plantations are rain-fed, planting should be done at the onset of rainy season. Otherwise, irrigation is recommended for planting during dry months. Care should be taken to ensure that soil around the coffee tree is not dried out after planting and that the moisture is maintained. Furthermore, water use should be managed to ensure sustainability. Next is pruning. Pruning, it will increase, maximize, and improve yield as such as is a necessary activity for the growers. Also, it is recommended to maintain the correct balance between leaf area and crop, thus preventing overbearing and dieback, maintaining good tree shape, reducing biennial bearing, and providing a good growth to the next season's crop. Next is the tapping or tapping. It described as cutting back shoots of coffee trees to keep it as less than 1 to 1.5 meters high. This operation is done to newly planted or newly rejuvenated coffee trees. The top coffee trees give dwarf appearance, encourage elongation of branches and production of more twigs, ultimately leading to higher yield. Next is the rejuvenation. Coffee rejuvenation is the cutting of vertical stems or trunks of old coffee trees to induce growth of new sprouts. Rejuvenation brings back 100% of the coffee green bean yield and reduces labor cost up to 50%. Rejuvenation is generally recommended when coffee trees are 10 years old. Grafting may be employed to improve coffee productivity. So, rejuvenation is done no pag if your coffee is already 10 years old, then it needs to be rejuvenation cutting para in order that it will be back for a young coffee. Pest and disease management. No, we already know what is pest, right? But in my definition, pest is unwanted animal or plants or microorganisms that affect the production, quality, and safety of coffee. A list of pests and disease in coffee plantation. So, coffee stem borers, coffee berry borer, coffee rust, berry rat, and coffee white borer. So there is it. So what you can see there is the pest and disease of the coffee. The grower should regularly inspect and monitor the production site for the presence of pests and diseases. Of course, as a grower or farmers, you should regularly inspect and monitor of your production. Dili kay adtuon na nimo ganahan. so that you will monitor what is the status of your coffee plant. Integrated Pest Management or IPM is an effective and environment-friendly approach to pest management to control and minimize pest damages. IPM combines the use of current and comprehensive information on the life cycle of pests, their interaction with the environment and the available pest control methods, varietal selection, biological, cultural, physical, mechanical, and chemical controls. Use of biological control agents. Environmental and consumer safety should be considered when using competing biological organisms and other metabolites to control pests, mites, plant pathogens, and foliage organism and coffee production. So, when we say biological agents, no, it's an active ingredients that are naturally occurring in organisms in any form intended to kill or control pests or control the behavior of fish or physiology of pests during production or storage crops. So with the use of biological control agents, you can control those pests and diseases. Then use of pesticides. Pesticides that are target specific and have minimal negative impact or impact on the agro ecosystem and environment should be used. Agricultural chemicals that are FPA registered for coffee cultivation or approved in the country where the produce is to be traded. They should be procured from licensed suppliers. Agricultural chemicals must be used according to its intended purpose, approved label instructions, then applied at approved dosage to prevent levels exceeding the maximum residue limits should be trained on proper application. Must be always clearly labeled and stored in original container. It's stored in a designated and secured area away from the main production area. Pesticides and other agrochemicals must be stored separately in an elevated area. So, we all know that pesticide is one of the harmful, no? It could be harm to our health, so that's why it should be placed properly. You should put your pesticides either it's empty in a proper waste disposal also, and it should be labeled and stored in a same chemical container. Next is harvesting operations. The harvesting is usually done by the selective picking of ripe coffee cherries, which are ready for harvest within 7 to 14 months after flowering depending on the locations, species and location. Harvesting is done by any of the two basic systems such as stripping, where cherries harvested are predominantly ripe, and selective picking or hand picking, where only ripe cherries are harvested. So harvesting is done by the two basic system. Then the selective picking, no, which is only ripe cherries are harvested. So pilion na siya. Coffee cherries should be placed in clean harvesting containers prior to segregation or selection operations. Harvested cherries should not be placed in direct contact with the ground. Newly harvested cherries should not be mixed with any of the fermented part of previously harvested cherries. Harvested cherries that are heavily bruised, damaged, diseased, or overripe should be segregated. Containers, example basket and plastic containers, should be used for harvesting should be made from non-toxic materials. Then the usable harvesting containers and tools, a cleaning and disinfection schedule should be placed to prevent contamination. So after the harvesting is done, so those tools or any machines should be clean and disinfect. There are types of coffee processing, as I mentioned a while ago, in a flow chart, right? The first one is the dry method. The dry method, also known as the traditional method, it is the oldest and simplest process that requires appropriate machinery. The method involves drying the whole cherry. Next is wet method. It is a mechanical removal of the exocarp in the presence of water. Removal of all the mesocarp by the fermentation or other methods and washing followed by drying to expose the parchment which is subsequently removed from the seed to produce green coffee beans. Depulping is the main difference between the dry and the machine which squeezes the cherries between surfaces. Then operation in the wet processing of coffee which removes the pulp and as much as possible the mucilage or mesocarp through mechanical means. A portion of mucilaginous mesocarp usually remains adhering to the parchment. This is also referred to as pulping. Fermentation is very critical terms of final coffee quality. Treatment intended to digest mucilaginous mesocarp adhering to the parchment of the pulp coffee, thereby allowing its elimination by washing. The fermentation process can be replaced by a mechanical demucilaging system to remove the mucilage by fraction. Packaging. The dried cherry and or parchment of coffee are packed in bulk in special cellulose or bags until they are sent to the mill where the hulling, sorting, grading, and bagging take place. Grain coffee beans be packed and sealed in bags made of food grade or non-toxic materials such as jute sacks. Storage. In storage is necessary, the bagged green coffee beans must be placed in pallets or similar material so that it will not be in direct contact with the ground. In storage sheds that are weatherproof, well ventilated, free from moisture and insect pests, and located away from sources of smoke and other odors that may contaminate the coffee. Storage facilities should be designed to minimize damage to the coffee. Moisture content of the green coffee beans should be monitored regularly during storage and maintained at a maximum of 12%. Storage area should be kept clean to avoid pest infestation. Maintenance of post-harvest equipment. All utensils, equipment, and machineries should be cleaned and sanitized before and after use. Cleaning and sanitizing should be conducted in a manner that protects the coffee against possible contamination. Cleaning agents should be used and stored and labeled in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions and relevant regulations. That's the end of my discussion. Thank you for listening and God bless us all.